and 10 belong together. And what I mean by that, it is alphabetical structure. What do I mean by that? In the writing, remember I talked to you about shackle sheets. Let me try to kind of explain this. There's a way that you run numbers or letters down a page, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, all the way down. You run down this way, and then across from each from that vertical line, there are horizontal lines, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay. Now, in military, they're called shackle sheets because you go down. For example, let's use one that I used to be familiar with, and call it the hot carbine. Well, you go down to the T, and then you use that T, the first letter, go over to the H, and then you find the number, and you write that number down. Or if it's in numbers, then you write down the letter, and you come out with all kind of creative 19, 20-year-old minds to give you different kind of sentences. Well, this psalm starts with, in the Hebrew alphabet, it goes down A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but it's not that because it's Hebrew. All right, it goes down, and it goes all the way down through Psalm 10, okay? So it's broken into the chapter break here, but in the original writing, the psalm is one psalm. So how do we explain that? We call it companion psalms, okay? Now, Psalm 23 and 24 are the same thing, okay? Psalm 23 and 24 are companion psalms. In other words, they're written with the same style. The first letter of the alphabet for a line, and the next line in the psalm, the next verse, is the following letter in the alphabet, okay? And so that's the way Psalm 9, Psalm 10, Psalm 23, Psalm 24, that's the way they're written. All right? So, but that's a long, long thing to deal with in subject matter. So what happened in 1050 in Spain, a monk at work, several of them, but one particularly, they sat down and they broke the Bible, and it's a good thing they did, because how would you know to turn to Isaiah 23 and verse 6? So what they did is put chapter numbers, and then later on they put verse numbers, and they did it purely for reference sake. All right? You'll notice in this ninth psalm, you'll notice there is a break in this psalm, and you can wonder why. In verse 17, if I was going to break that psalm, I would have broke it between 16 and 17 and started 10 there. But it breaks the alphabetical design of the writer, see, to use that particular style of design. I probably understand that easier for me because I used to use shackle sheets, and therefore I understand the first letter of each verse. It corresponds to the next one in line in the alphabet coming down. And so once you get that in your mind, then it's easier to understand the subject matter in this psalm. So it is 9 and 10 go together. We're not going to study them like that because of the length of time that's involved in studying that great length of material. So we're going to use the breakdown of it, and we're going to study it like this. Now, I've given you a 3-point outline. A 3-point outline. The first 10 verses deal with the author's personal exultation in God, the glory of being with God as your partner, with your helper, with your refuge, with your strength, walking with God, in other words. A person that's in tune and in harmony with God. That's the first 10 verses. And that's the individual, and I've used the word corporate here because that's a word nowadays thrown around. Well, do you do that in the corporate worship? Well, corporate simply is used to be the whole congregation together. So you could say this is the corporate exaltation in God, the whole group, if you will, all of God's people, and all of them praising God for His deliverance and His wonderful work in their life. Now, see, verse 17 through 20, see, it sets apart from that. It sets apart from that, and the reason it does is because it belongs, I believe, in the other subject matter. But regardless of that, we'll do the best we can as we put this into our minds. So the theme of the psalm, the author's David, the theme of the psalm is God judges the nations, and it is He who is in control. The ancients used the word El, E-L. That was the most common word for God. It is the word Almighty, all-powerful, and used in reference to Elohim, okay? El Shaddai, El, the all-powerful, the great one. El Shaddai is the Hebrew in the 23rd Psalm. El Shaddai, the great, big, the powerful one. And so this was the concept of the ancients was, unlike today, there wasn't any thought of this other evolution. I had a talk with a guy today talking about the three-dimensional time and things of that nature, and how we look at lateral time and 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 80 years, and we look at it in a string like that. And God doesn't do that. God doesn't do that. Probably one of your favorite authors, Nathan. Yeah, his book, Flatland, isn't it? I think I need to order that because I'd like to hand one of those to a little old paperback, isn't it, about that big? I remember reading it years ago, but he deals with that time. Well, these people, because they could understand, or were closer, if you will, to things round about them, and they dealt so much with power, like the fighting man. The fighting man didn't fight at 10,000 yards with a torpedo or a rocket coming out of the water out of a submarine. He didn't fight at that kind of range. The bows in that day and age were good for about 300 yards. And the spears, you can imagine throwing a spear. You can imagine throwing a spear somewhere around what? I'm not an accomplished spear chunker, so I don't know. But I don't know. But you can't throw a spear much over from here to the street. So that's close. And then when that spear, that arrow shot, that spear's thrown, and then you're relying on what? What? Yeah, you are on the sword. I'm relying on my feet. I'm headed the other way. Yeah, but the sword, you see, that sword's about yay long. Then later on, the two-handed sword was developed, and it was developed long and two-handed to keep people further away from you. Well, the Israelite sword's about that long, about that long. So they were close to things, this violence. They were close to their enemy, They couldn't push a button and drop a rocket on top of his head. They had to deal with this personally. That's why there's this personal exaltation in God. So let's read it together. I will give thanks unto Jehovah with my whole heart. I think anything less in thanksgiving would be foolish, wouldn't you? I will show forth all thy marvelous works. I will be glad and exult in thee. I will sing praise to thy name, O thou most high. There's that El. There's that powerful, almighty, greatest one. See? When mine enemies turn back. Literally, I looked in Colin Delitzsch in that Hebrew word study, and the idea here with the verb is that this is a present ongoing situation when David is praising God. They are in retreat. And yet in that retreat, they are still, notice they stumble and perish. It's an ongoing battle. And historically, this is the battle with the Ammonites. The battle with the Ammonites. And the pursuit and the ongoing destruction of them. And David is exulting in the fact that the battle has turned and that they're able to overcome the enemy. And so they stumble as they're retreating. The army is it's not a organized withdrawal. Okay, so they're having great difficulty and even suffering extreme casualties in the retreat. And then in verse 4, for thou hast maintained my right and my cause. That's important. Revelation 6 and verse 9, remember when we studied through Revelation, those under the altar cried out, said, how long, O Lord, till you avenge us? You know, remember how we died. Remember our pain. Remember our suffering. In faithfulness, remember us. For the Revelation in chapter 6 shows God maintained the cause. He didn't forget it. He didn't forget it. Let bygones be bygones. No, that's not the case. Thou sattest in the throne judging righteously. Thou hast rebuked the nations. Thou hast destroyed the wicked. Thou hast blotted out their name forever and ever. This is a total destruction, you see, upon the enemy. The enemy are come to an end. They are desolate forever. This is wipeout time, see? This is wipeout time. And the cities which thou hast overthrown, he gives credit to God. Their cities thou hast overthrown. This is a tremendous campaign militarily for David. And the very remembrance of them is perished. Remember, we look in some of the prophecies, and it says that the great city of Assyria would become a habitation for jackals, and the tumbleweeds would blow across it. What's that a picture of? Well, let's go to B. That's answer A. Let's go to B. The picture is what? Desolation. Yeah. Well, Matador's close. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can't get out of this one. No. You will be burned in sackcloth and ashes. Okay. So the idea is that they are so totally, completely annihilated. But you remember the Amalekites, and Saul did that. What did God tell him to do when he went down to fight the Amalekites? What did he say do? Yeah, he didn't say leave a few of the choice men and women. He didn't say bring back the cattle. He didn't say bring back the king. He said wipe them off of the face of the earth. Somebody needs that kind of message for this ISIS bunch. You know? Enough of that. But Jehovah said it's his king forever. Remember Nebuchadnezzar strutting around on his balcony and saying, look at me. I'm the most magnificent guy in the world. And that's what I think, and it's all that matters because I'm the king. You remember that? And God said, I told you about this. Sent him out to eat grass like an ox. Fingernails grew like talons. He had to scratch and dig in the dirt. The dews of heaven soaked him down every night. He was a madman. Then when God allowed his sins to return, then he said, now I know. That's Daniel 4, verse 32. Now I know that the Most High, that's that same word you just looked at top of my page, verse 2, and the Most High ruleth in the affairs of men and giveth the kingdoms to whomsoever he will. That's old Nebuchadnezzar. Probably greater than any of the Caesars as far as potentate. the most powerful human being on the face of the earth, probably greater than the Caesars, Nebuchadnezzar. Jehovah sits as king, not Neb. He's prepared his throne for judgment. He will judge the world in righteousness. He will minister judgment to the peoples in uprightness. Now, we used that thought at a funeral last week when we talked about quoting what Abraham said to the Lord when he said in Genesis 18, verse 25, he says, will not the judge of all the earth do that which is right? He will. So here you have in this Psalms a close understanding because this man walks with God. Or an understanding, rather, based on the closeness of his relationship with God. Now let's look at some of this in verse 9. Jehovah will be a high tower. What's that mean? In that day and age, what was a tower? Yeah, it was a fortified place for defense. In the American wilderness in the 1700s, we built blockhouses. Same thing. It overhung the one below it, so you could keep them away from the walls, from setting fires and all that. It was where everybody ran, the blockhouses in the corner of the stockade, get up there for safety. That's the idea here. It's for safety, a high tower in times of trouble. Well, the only time you get in a high tower is in times of trouble. You see, the high ground. Take the high ground. Get in a fortified position. And here's what he said in verse 10, and they will know thy name, and they that know thy name will put their trust in thee. For thou, Jehovah, hast not forsaken them that seek thee. Remember no, you don't remember, we hadn't studied it yet, but in Psalm 73, he said, as for me, my feet had well nigh slipped, because I looked at the arrogance of the wicked and their prosperity, and I said, I don't know about this, whether I'm doing right to be right. And then he said, I went into their latter end. I went in to God's house, and I considered their latter end. And he goes on to say in verse 25 of that psalm that they would not be forsaken by God. For those that put their trust in God. That's this walk with God, you see. So he's moved now from the individual to the group, if you will, to the people of God. Here, sing praises to Jehovah, who dwelleth in Zion. Declare among the people his doing. Talk about the Lord. See, talk about what the Lord has done in your life. It's all right to do that. For he that makes inquisition for blood remembers them. That's a statement that comes from the avenger of blood. Remember in ancient Israel that the firstborn son was the avenger of blood for that family? And the city of refuges, 6 of them, 3 on one side of the Jordan on the east side, 3 on the west side of Jordan. And if you were chopping wood and the axe slipped and you hit somebody in the head and killed them, you dropped that axe and headed to one of the cities of refuge. Why? Because here comes the firstborn son of that family, and he has liberty and license of God to kill you. He is the blood avenger. So he's coming after you. So you go to the city of refuge, you lay your case before the judges in the gate of the city, and then they will decide whether to keep you in the city for a length of time. That's what manslaughter required. Or if it was murder, they're going to throw you outside the city and close the city gates, which would mean what? You're a dead duck, because the duck hunter is coming. See? The avenger of blood. Now, that same word is used in Job, and I use that quite a bit in funeral. I know that my Redeemer lives. And the word Redeemer comes from the Hebrew word goel. And that El, that's God given, goel, God given right, the blood avenger, the blood avenger. In Revelation 19, he's on his white charger, his robes splattered with blood. He's coming forth with the army of heaven to judge and to make war, the Bible says. He is the blood avenger. Okay? So he's our older brother. Remember that? The oldest son or brother is the Goel, the blood avenger. So Job said, I know that my Redeemer lives. And in the end, he will stand upon my dust. In other words, he is going to take my part. And so here you have that great promise here. He forgetteth not the cry of the meek. That's translated poor in some translations. And it's actually the same word in Numbers 12, verse 3. And why it's translated poor, I don't know. Because it's the word where the Bible says that Moses is the meekest of men that dwell on the face of the earth. Moses wasn't poor. Meek is the word. Okay? And so, I don't understand it. It's got a number. My translation has a little note, and it says over to the margin, and it says meek. He forgetteth not the cry of the meek. The word meek is a word which means harnessed power. And, of course, the harness is the harness God has laid upon us, and it's power under control, if you will. Have mercy upon me, O Jehovah. Behold my affliction which I suffer of them that hate me. Thou lift me up from the gates of death. That's one of our figures of speech we'll look at later. That I may show forth all of thy praise in the gates of the daughter of Zion. Another figure. I will rejoice in thy salvation. And so verse 4, he says, you have saved me, and I will stand in the gates of the people, of your people, and I'll tell them of my salvation. I'll tell them of my salvation. That sounds so much different than when you ask someone, and I've asked people, yeah, are you saved? Well, Brother Crowley, I sure hope so. Well, this sounds different, doesn't it? This is a sinner saved by grace. And he says, I'm going to tell folks about it. Confidence. Confident in God. Look at verse 15. The figure continues. The nations are sunk down in the pit that they have made. Here's that parallelism. In the net which they hid is their own foot taken. You know, you can't help but believe that David, as a young boy, dug pits for animals, put snares out. Guy, you built snares for hogs, didn't you? Great success. Giving them stainless steel necklaces to wear. I remember you saying that. So, well, what's the purpose of that snare? Catch him, isn't it, right? And so here's, David as a young lad. You can just see him out there setting a snare for, for some animal as he's out there watching the sheep, and maybe he sees a jackal or something like that, and he would set a snare, a net to catch those. You just kind of get the idea that this fella is pretty close to nature, to around things like that. Now, the pit may have more to do with the military than I know the Roman soldiers dug pits, put sharpened stakes in them like a lot of people do in Southeast Asia. So, verse 16, Jehovah hath made himself known. He hath executed judgment. The wicked is snared in the work. There's that snare, net, pit thing. The wicked has snared in the work of his own hands, is snared. So he's caught in his own devices, you see. He's caught in his own devices. The wicked shall be turned back into Sheol. What's Sheol? Someone else have another word there? hell, okay? Pit. So the idea uses the King James translation and some of the New King James, I think. They uniformly translate it all the way across the Old Testament. Sheol is hell. And the word Hades, uniformly translated in the New Testament, is hell. And so this is the wicked shall be turned back into hell, even all the nations that forget God. See that? National sin is remembered. We're struggling in a nation today that once knew God, that could respond to anything in our righteous might. And that's a quote. In our righteous might. But a nation that forgets God will be turned into hell. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that what hell, isn't that the atmosphere in hell? It's a place where God is not. It's a place where God is not mentioned. It's a place where God's mercy is not found. It is a place where God's love is not revealed. And so a nation that chooses to forget God will be turned into hell. For the needy shall not always be forgotten, nor the expectation of the meek perish forever. Remember Revelation 6? Oh, Lord, how long? How long, oh, Lord, how long? And he said it'll be yet for a little while. For a little while. In other words, he's saying to those souls crying out under the altar, just hang on a little bit. I'll take care of this. I'll take care of it. Just wait. Arise, O Jehovah. Let not man prevail. Let the nations be judged in thy sight. Put them in fear, O Jehovah. Let the nations know themselves to be but men. The individual I was talking to today considers the human mind the greatest accomplishment in the universe, which is human secularism. And that breeds the agnostic, it breeds the atheist. I used Robert Ingersoll in our sermon Sunday night and Sunday morning at Roaring Springs. He was one of the greatest agnostics that the world ever produced. And he beat up a lot of preachers of the early Restoration movement, and the ones that defeated him are the ones that believed in the verbal plenary inspiration of the Bible, believed every word of it, and they were the ones that could beat him. The denominational world couldn't beat him because he would attack them at their particular weakness. The one I mentioned Sunday night was this individual wanted to debate him on the validity of the Scripture, and Ingersoll used his own doctrine against him. He said, "You don't believe the Bible either. Why should I debate you?" Because this particular denominational preacher did not believe that one would need to be baptized in order to be saved. So he was lost before he started. Lost before he started. So, what you have in the reading of this psalm, any questions or comments have read through that? I've been forgetting. I get so wrapped up in these, I forget I've got an audience sometimes. I really enjoy these. I study them myself a lot. Matter of fact, when Megan called me this afternoon, I was hip deep in a study of this, and I just was reading and reading. So you have to remember now, it's in that alphabetical. Each verse starts with a different letter from top to bottom of the Hebrew alphabet. The 9th Psalm addresses the thanksgiving and praise for the defeat. We believe it's the Ammonites. This particular battle, the way they withdrew and the pursuit of the army of David, and the way they continued to be destroyed and their cities wiped out completely, we believe this was the extinguishing of the Ammonites. So the defeat of the foreign enemy, as David completely destroyed them. So you have thanksgiving in this psalm, and you have praise. Now, wicked nations normally are ungodly or wicked nations. Normally in the Psalms has to do with the Gentile nations, the ungodly or the wicked or the heathen. I think, is that the word I use? Yes. That was my name till I was probably in the 8th or 9th grade. That's good to see it in print. Yep. At any rate, wicked nations is referencing the heathen nations round about Israel. Okay? That's what it, when a nation is ungodly, it's heathen. Isn't that amazing? When a nation is wicked, it has become heathen. It has become heathen. In other words, it doesn't worship the Lord God of heaven. Worships everything else. All different types of things. But the thing that I like about this psalm, I put it down on E on the outline, it just rings with triumph. It does. It just shouts that to me, that he is, because of this relationship with God, God has responded to him, and he's so filled with that, it just rings with triumph. I like to be a winner, don't you? I used to like to win at marbles, you know. I'd take them home. Mom make take them back. She thought we were gambling. And of course we wasn't. We'd have to take them back and give them back to who we won them from, you know. And so that kind of put the quietus on it. But I like to win. If we're playing baseball, I like to win. You know, or whatever it is. I like triumph. I do. I like to see good brethren whip problems and grow strong, and I like to see that with my children and my grandchildren. I like to see them overcome things and triumph over things. I get excited about it. I see something that would almost whip them down 5 years ago, and they've overcome that and have a good positive attitude, and I like that. I like that. It's just exciting. It is. So this psalm rings with triumph. It just does. We've got just a few minutes here. And Bob, by the way, that class out there, the teen bunch, they're not coming in tonight. After they finish their class, they're going to have their little Christmas cupcake thing. Okay, so we'll go out later and see if any's left over. Right? So, at any rate, lessons. Here's the lessons. Let's go through these. There is refuge in the Lord. And in that refuge, all opposition to God comes to a terrible end. It does in this psalm. You don't have to have the New Testament to know that. All opposition to God comes to a terrible end. I can't think of anything more terrible than verse 17, the wicked shall be turned back into hell. It's just terrible, isn't it? Verse 10, one is never alone. Not with the individual that walks with God. You're never alone. And then from the gates of death to the gates of praise, there's that saved in the nick of time, you might say. I've been saved from death, and when I have been saved, the next step for me is praise. Is praise. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Verse 17, national sin. God condemns a nation and destroys a nation that would not honor him. Verse 20 is respect. Best example I know of that would be Nebuchadnezzar out grazing around like a cow. And then God letting his sense return, and he say, no, now I know now. Put them in fear, O Jehovah. Let the nations know themselves to be but men. See, we're just dust. That's all we are. And to the dust we shall return. So we have nothing in this body that will last. We have no power that will last. As we get older, we diminish, and we're told that we reach our best strength and our best power somewhere around 38. to 40, right in there, that the male body reaches its maturity as far as the body development. It's somewhere around 28 years old. At 20, women at 33, the article I was reading. And then at a man is the strongest physically he's going to be, if everything's right, of course, at about 38, 39. That's the most powerful he's going to be. And then after that, it's kind of downhill. Oh, you need a parachute sometime just to slow you down. Isn't that right? So, but be grateful for popping and snapping when you get up in the morning and groaning, because that means you're alive. You know, it does. It means you're alive. So here we have it. Figures of speech. Trust in God's name, the name of God, that most high name, that almighty name. The inquisition of blood, we've already discussed that. That's the blood avenger. The gates of death is a figure for the power of death. Remember the Lord said, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, talking about his church. That means all of the power of hell, all of what hell could bring about, all of that. So gates of death that's a figure. Pit, net, trap, we know what those are. Verse 20, after all, we're only men. We're only men. And it's important that we understand that as mature Christian men, that we are just men, and therefore we need the Lord in our lives. I would love to hear in this world that's aflame, some politicians stand up and say something about we need God's help in this.